If you were an adolescent in the 1950s, or let's be honest, an adolescent in basically any decade since, there's this one book that probably felt like a shortcut to being understood. It was almost like a manual for disaffection.
Oh, absolutely. I'm talking, of course, about The Catcher in the Rye.
Exactly. It's the book you read when you first get that inkling that maybe, just maybe, all the adults are full of it.
It's a rite of passage, no question.
Right. But today, we're not just doing a deep dive on Holden Caulfield. We're going after the man who created him and then, this is the part that gets me, spent the next 50 years fighting a war to make sure we knew absolutely nothing else about him.
And that really is the central paradox of J.D. Salinger, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. You have an author whose work grabbed American culture by the shoulders and, shook it, demanded attention.
And
Yet he becomes known as the Greta Garbo of literature, a man who spent the last half of his life just fighting tooth and nail to be invisible.
I think for most people, that's where the image of Salinger just stops, at that one word. Recluse. You can picture this grumpy old guy in a house on a hill in New Hampshire, yelling at people to get off his lawn. But looking at the stack of source material we have, biographies, court records, memoirs from his own daughter and his lovers, that recluse label just feels, it feels incredibly lazy.
It's way too simple. It completely masks the reality of who this person was. The reality is so much darker, so much more spiritual, and just profoundly shaped by trauma.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to move past the myth of the hermit.
Exactly. We need to uncover the war-traumatized veteran, the obsessive spiritual seeker, and maybe the most surprising part of all, the man who never actually stopped writing.
That's the detail that's just mind-blowing to me. He didn't stop writing, he just stopped publishing.
The huge distinction.
But okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves. To really understand why he built that wall around himself, we have to understand who he was before the wall went up. So we have to start at the beginning. Jerome David Salinger, born in New York City, New Year's Day, 1919.
And right there, from the very beginning, you can see the roots of this identity crisis. He's born in Manhattan. His father, Sol Salinger, is a successful kosher cheese trader. His family is of Lithuanian Jewish descent.
Okay.
But his mother, Marie, she was born in Iowa. She was of German, Irish, and Scottish descent. She wasn't Jewish.
And Salinger didn't know this growing up, right? This is one of those family secrets that just seems impossible by today's standards.
He had no idea. And this is so key to understanding the theme of phoniness that just permeates his work. His mother changed her first name to Miriam to appease her Jewish in-laws. She completely played the part of the Jewish matriarch. So, in fact, that J.D. didn't find out his own mother wasn't Jewish until after his bar mitzvah.
Wait. After his bar mitzvah,
Yeah.
That is just wow. So he's growing up with this foundational secret, this performance happening right inside his own home. I mean, that has to mess with your head.
Of course it does. He is living with a phony performance, to use his most famous word, from day one. He's trying to navigate this dual identity he doesn't even know he has. And it's not like he was thriving outside the home either.
Right. He was not exactly a star student.
No. His academic file literally contains the word mediocre. He struggled at the McBurney School in Manhattan, had a hard time fitting in, and so his parents eventually just shipped him off to Valley Forge Military Academy in Pennsylvania.
Which, of course, becomes the direct blueprint for Pensy Prep in The Catcher in the Rye.
It is Pensy Prep. And, while he was there, the mythology and the reality of Salinger the writer start to form. He was the literary editor of the yearbook, so he was definitely writing, but he wasn't some kind of academic prodigy. His IQ was recorded as being between 111 and 115.
So above average, sure, but not screaming once-in-a-generation literary genius.
Exactly. Not at all.
I love that detail from the biographies about his writing habits there. It sounds like something out of a movie, but he apparently really did it. Writing stories under his covers with a flashlight.
He really did. It's the absolute quintessential image of the young, isolated artist, isn't it? He was finding his escape from that rigid, conformist military structure. You have to picture the environment, the strict discipline, the uniforms, all of it. And there's Salinger, literally hiding in the dark, creating these other worlds.
A form of rebellion right there.
Absolutely. His teachers noted he had an innate talent for drama, but he really didn't know what to do with it yet. He just sort of bounced around after that. Tried NYU, tried Ursinus College. He just kept dropping out.
And wasn't there a point where his father tried to get him into the family business? Or a related business?
The cheese trader father wanted his son in the meat importing business, yeah. It was a classic case of, well, if the kid can't study, he can work. So he sends J.D. to Poland to work in a slaughterhouse.
To Poland, pre-war Poland.
Yeah. Salinger lasted, I think, a few weeks. He was absolutely disgusted by the whole thing.
I can only imagine going from writing secret stories by flashlight to standing on a slaughterhouse floor. That's some serious whiplash.
It was a total shock to his system. And it's actually seen as the likely origin of his later lifelong vegetarianism. He couldn't shake the imagery of the slaughter.
So he's drifting, he's a college dropout, he hates the meat business. When does that switch finally flip? When does he start to become a writer in a serious way?
The real turning point comes in a class he takes at Columbia University. The professor is Whit Burnett, who was the editor of Story magazine. And Burnett was a pretty big deal.
Okay.
And he sees the spark in Salinger that all the other teachers seem to have missed. He becomes a mentor. He helps Salinger get his very first story, The Young Folks, published in the magazine in 1940.
So he finally has momentum.
He has momentum. He's submitting to the New Yorker. He's getting some traction. He feels like he's finally on the cusp of his career taking off. She thinks he's arrived.
And then history intervenes.
World War II intervenes. And I cannot stress this enough. You cannot possibly understand J.D. Salinger, the man or the writer, without understanding his war. We're not talking about a guy who sat behind a desk shuffling papers. He saw the absolute, unfiltered worst of the 20th century up close and personal.
He was drafted in 1942. He's in the 12th Infantry Regiment. But because of his background, specifically that he spoke German and French, he wasn't just put in with the regular infantry, was he?
That's right. He was assigned to the Counterintelligence Corps. They were known as the Ritchie Boys, named after Camp Ritchie in Maryland, where they were trained. Their job wasn't just to shoot. Their job was interrogation. He was dealing directly with German prisoners, digging for intelligence, often right on the front lines.
So that puts him in a completely different psychological space than the average soldier. He's not just fighting an enemy, he's deeply embedded in the enemy's psychology. He has to talk to them, understand them, find their tells, catch them in lies.
Exactly. And if you look at his service record, it is just a highlight reel of pure horror.
He lands on Utah Beach on D-Day.
He survives D-Day. He fights through the hedgerows of Normandy, which was just brutal, close quarters combat. He's in the Battle of the Bulge, freezing, surrounded, constant shelling. He fights in the Battle of Herkin Forest, which historians just call a meat grinder. Thousands of casualties for almost no strategic gain.
But the moment that seems to have truly broken him, the thing that really separates Salinger from so many other war writers, that happened in April of 1945.
Yeah. This is when his unit stumbles upon a concentration camp.
This wasn't one of the main camps, right?
It was Kaufering IV, a sub-camp of Dachau. Salinger walked into that place right after it was liberated. The snow was melting, revealing bodies that had been hidden all winter. He saw the piles of corpses. He saw the ovens. He saw the survivors, the ones who look more like skeletons than human beings.
It's impossible for us to really imagine. And we see the black and white footage now, and it feels historical, distant. But he was there. He smelled it.
He later told his daughter, Margaret, something that still gives me chills. He said, "You never really get the smell of burning flesh out of your nose entirely, no matter how long you live."
Wow. And that just puts such a different spin on Holden Caulfield, doesn't it? I mean, we think of Holden as this privileged, maybe whiny teenager complaining about his prep school. But the man writing him is walking around with the literal smell of the Holocaust in his memory.
It reframes the entire book. It reframes his entire life's work. When Holden talks about being the catcher in the rye, wanting to catch kids before they fall off this crazy cliff, that's a trauma response.
Yeah.
That's a man who saw the ultimate violent destruction of innocence at Dachau and dedicates his art to trying to save children from the adult world that could create such a thing. It's not an exaggeration to say that Salinger was hospitalized for combat stress reaction, what we would now call PTSD, after Germany surrendered. He checked himself into a hospital in Nuremberg.
And yet, right in the middle of all this chaos and trauma, there's this bizarre, almost celebrity-focused story. He goes looking for Ernest Hemingway.
It's so surreal. Hemingway was in Paris, acting as a war correspondent, basically holding court at the Ritz Hotel. And Salinger, this 20-something aspiring writer covered in mud from the front lines, just decides he's going to go find him, jumps in a Jeep and drives to Paris.
What was he even expecting to find?
I think he expected the myth. The tough, macho Papa Hemingway persona. But he told people later that he found Hemingway to be surprisingly soft. In a friendly, approachable way, they drank champagne. And Hemingway read some of Salinger's stories and famously said, Jesus, he has a hell of a talent.
That validation at that specific moment in his life must have felt like a lifeline.
Oh, for sure. The most famous writer in the world telling you that you've got it, while you're literally surrounded by death and destruction.
So he comes back from the war, carrying all this trauma, but also carrying this character that he's been working on for years.
He'd been carrying Holden Caulfield in his head through the trenches. The story goes he had the first 6 chapters of what would become Catcher with him during the D-Day invasion. He kept them in his pocket.
And he'd actually sold a Holden story before the war, right? To the New Yorker.
He did. Back in 1941, a story called Slight Rebellion off Madison. It featured Holden.
But it never ran.
No, and talk about a case of spectacularly bad timing. It was scheduled to run in the December 1941 issue. And then Pearl Harbor happens. And the editors at the New Yorker look at this story about a jittery, dissatisfied teenager having a bit of a breakdown, and they basically said, this is not exactly the morale boost the country needs right now.
So they just shelved it.
They shelved it.
Yeah.
So it just sits there for years. The war ends. Salinger comes back. He expands it into a novel. And finally, on July 16, 1951, The Catcher in the Rye is published.
And it explodes.
It's hard to overstate the impact. It just blew up. It spent 30 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list.
Okay.
It went on to sell over 10 million copies. It wasn't just a book. It was a genuine cultural phenomenon. It was like the literary equivalent of the Beatles showing up a decade early.
But it wasn't exactly embraced by the establishment. The censorship stats are almost funny to look back on. People were terrified of this book.
Oh, they were staggering.
Yeah.
Parents were losing their minds over it. There's a famous story of one parent who actually sat down and tabulated every single offense in the book.
You're kidding.
No, they counted 237 instances of the word goddamn, 58 uses of bastard, 31 Chris eggs, and, this is my personal favorite, 1 incident of flatulence.
One fart joke was on the list of reasons to ban it.
It was a different time. But you see, that's precisely why it worked so well. It wasn't really about the swear words themselves. It was about the authenticity of the voice. For the first time, a major author was speaking to young people, not just about them.
It was an indispensable manual for disaffection.
That's the perfect phrase for it. If you felt alienated, if you felt like no one understood you, Holden was your guy. He sounded like you thought. He hated the things you hated.
And of course, when you have a hit that big, Hollywood comes knocking. Everybody wants a piece of Holden Caulfield.
They banged down his door. But this is really where we see the first major step in Salinger's retreat from the world. You see, before Catcher became this massive success, back when he was still a struggling writer, he had sold the film rights to a short story called Uncle Wiggily in Connecticut.
And that became the movie My Foolish Heart.
A movie that was, by all accounts, an absolute disaster. They took his tragic, very nuanced story about a woman realizing her life is empty, and they turned it into this sappy, sentimental romance. Critics hated it. Salinger was humiliated by it. He felt like he had prostituted his art.
And that was it for him.
That was it. He vowed right then and there, no more movies, ever.
Which is incredible because the offers kept coming for decades. We're talking Spielberg, Harvey Weinstein, Billy Wilder. They all wanted to adapt Catcher.
And he turned every single one of them down. Wouldn't even take the meetings. But there is one what if that is just, it's too good. Jerry Lewis, the comedian, spent years trying to get the rights.
Jerry Lewis.
Jerry Lewis wanted to play Holden Caulfield.
No, I cannot picture that. Hey, lady, is Holden Caulfield. That feels so wrong.
It would have been a spectacular train wreck.
Yeah.
But Salinger held firm. He learned a lesson from My Foolish Heart. To protect his work, he had to control it completely. And to control his life, he realized he had to leave the stage entirely.
So 1953, he packs his bags, leaves New York City, the absolute center of the publishing universe, and moves to Cornish, New Hampshire.
Buys a 90-acre property on a hill. He starts building a literal fence. But, and this is a nuance that I think most people miss, he didn't go full hermit right away. In the beginning, he was actually kind of social.
With who?
With the local high school student.
Wait, really? That seems so counter to the get off my lawn image we all have.
It does, but you have to remember, he always identified with youth. He felt adults were phonies. So for a while, he would invite these high school kids over to his house. They'd listen to records, he'd ask them about their problems, they'd talk about football. He was sort of channeling that Holden Caulfield energy. He felt safer with them than he did with the literary critics in New York.
So what changed?
The betrayal happened.
The
interview. A high school student named Shirley Blaney asked if she could interview him for the school paper. And Salinger, probably thinking, sure, what's the harm? Nice kid, it's for a school project. He agreed. He gave her these really candid answers, talked about his work, his writing routine.
Yeah.
And then the interview didn't just run in the high school paper. It got picked up and published on the editorial page of the local city paper, the Daily Eagle.
So he felt set up, tricked. He felt completely and utterly betrayed. To him, this was definitive proof that the outside world, no matter how innocent it seemed, was just trying to exploit him. He cut off all contact with the students immediately. He built the wall higher, and as that physical wall went up, his internal landscape started to shift dramatically as well.
This is where we start to get into the spiritual side of things. Because he wasn't just sitting up there in New Hampshire sulking, he was actively searching for something.
He really was. He'd been interested in Zen Buddhism since the late 40s. But once he's in Cornish, he goes much, much deeper. He moves from Zen to a school of thought called Advaita Vedanta Hinduism, specifically following the teachings of a mystic named Ramakrishna.
Okay, for those of us who aren't theology majors, what does that shift actually mean for his daily life? Is this just, more meditation? It's much more than that. In practical terms, it meant a pretty extreme shift toward asceticism. Advaita Vedanta teaches that the material world is fundamentally an illusion, a distraction. It encourages things like celibacy, detachment from worldly responsibilities, and this belief that the householder life, having a family, a job, paying the mortgage, is an obstacle to enlightenment. It's all about stripping away the ego.
That seems like an incredibly difficult philosophy to live by if you are, say, a husband and a father, or if you're trying to write novels about the complexities of human beings.
It's almost impossible, and we'll definitely get to the damage that caused his family in a moment. But you can also see this profound shift in his writing. This is the era when he's publishing the Glass family stories. Franny and Zuri, Raise High, The Roof Beam, Carpenters, and Seymour. An introduction.
And how did the writing itself change?
Well, it became much less about plot, the boy gets kicked out of school and wanders around New York, and much more about ideas, spiritual ideas. The stories became discursive, philosophical, almost like lectures at times. The Glass family characters are all impossibly brilliant. They're precocious, and frankly, they act like they are spiritually superior to every other person on the planet.
I remember reading Franny and Zooey and feeling like the author was judging me for not being as smart or as spiritual as the characters. It's brilliant writing, but it's not exactly what you'd call warm.
You were not alone in that feeling.
Right.
The critics really started to turn on him. They felt the work was becoming insulated, narcissistic, self-congratulatory. It felt like Salinger was creating this perfect private world for his characters and writing for a cult of one.
And then came the final straw. Hapworth 16, 1924.
Ah, yes. The infamous last publication.
This was in 1965.
Yep. It took up almost an entire issue of The New Yorker. And it's essentially a very, very long letter written by Seymour Glass from summer camp when he's 7 years old. And it is a difficult read. It's dense, it's arrogant, it feels endless. You have a 7-year-old demanding books on classical literature and critiquing the adults around him with a vocabulary that a PhD would struggle with.
And the critics did not like it.
They universally panned it. They hated it. They said Salinger had completely lost his mind, that he disappeared up his own.
And that was it. He took his ball and went home for good.
That was it. Silence. After the vicious backlash to Hapworth, Salinger never published another word in his lifetime. He just decided the public didn't deserve his work anymore. The door was closed.
Well, while he stopped publishing, he didn't stop living. And this is the part of the deep dive where we really have to look behind that wall he built, because while he was preaching spiritual detachment and celibacy in his writing, his personal life was, messy is a massive understatement.
It was predatory, let's be blunt. If you look at the pattern of the women in his life, it is deeply, deeply troubling. He had a clear fixation on very young women, often teenagers, who were right on the cusp of adulthood. He seemed to want these innocent blank slates that he could mold and teach his spiritual views to.
We mentioned Una O'Neill earlier, the playwright's daughter.
Right. He dated her before the war. She was young, beautiful, a debutante. And she ends up leaving him for Charlie Chaplin, who is much, much older. And Salinger's reaction was just pure vitriol. He wrote this incredibly scathing letter describing Chaplin squatting gray and nude, and swinging his thyroid around. It was just raw, petty jealousy.
And then there was his first wife, Sylvia, the German wife.
Sylvia Welter, this is another wild story. He marries her while he's on denazification duty in Germany. So His literal job is hunting for former Nazis, and he marries a German woman who may have had Nazi ties herself. The records are murky on that. He brings her back to the U.S., but the whole marriage falls apart in 8 months.
And what happened to her?
This just shows the level of detachment he was capable of. Years later, a letter arrived from her. His daughter Margaret was there and watched him just tear it up without even opening it. When he was done with a person, they simply ceased to exist for him.
But the most significant relationship from this period is Claire Douglas, the mother of his 2 children.
Claire was a Radcliffe student, the golden girl archetype. She was just months away from graduating. Salinger meets her and convinces her to drop out of college and move into his fortress of solitude in Cornish. They married in 1955. And the life she describes there, it sounds like something out of a psychological thriller.
What was the day-to-day existence like for her?
It sounds harrowing. Salinger's spiritual diet was constantly changing. One month it was Kriya Yoga, the next it was Scientology, then Christian Science, then a macrobiotic diet. And poor Claire was expected to perfectly mirror every new obsession. If he was into Zen, she had to be into Zen. If he decided they were only eating nuts and berries, she had to eat nuts and berries.
That sounds exhausting.
It was more than exhausting. She admitted years later that the isolation became so crushing that she actually formulated a plan to murder their daughter Margaret and then commit suicide.
My God. That is a level of despair that's just hard to even comprehend.
She felt completely trapped. He wanted a spiritual companion, but he treated the people in his life like props in his spiritual drama. When she wasn't perfectly aligned with his current mood, he'd just freeze her out, give her the silent treatment for days. She ended up running away instead, thankfully.
Yeah.
But it just shows you the pressure cooker environment inside that house.
And then, even later in his life, the pattern just repeats itself. 1972, the story of Joyce Maynard.
This is probably the most famous one. Salinger was 53 years old. Joyce Maynard was 18. She was a freshman at Yale, a gifted writer who had just been featured on the cover of the New York Times Magazine.
And he sees the article and writes to her.
He writes her these letters, warning her about the dangers and corrupting influence of fame. It was incredibly seductive. I'm the only one who really understands you.
And she does the exact same thing Claire Douglas did. She drops out of school for him.
She dropped out of Yale to go live with a 53-year-old man in New Hampshire. The relationship lasted for 9 months, but it ended just as abruptly. The accounts differ. Salinger later told his daughter it was because Maynard wanted children and he was too old. Maynard's version is that he just dismissed her, sent her away like a servant when he got bored or when she started to have needs of her own.
She felt used.
She said later that she felt she was groomed to be the perfect, adoring partner for a narcissist.
And she's the one who eventually auctioned off his letters. Right.
She did, for over $150,000. She claimed she needed the money for her kids' college education, but it was also clearly a way for her to reclaim her own narrative. And Salinger was absolutely furious. To him, privacy was a religion, and what she did was the ultimate blasphemy.
We also have the perspective of his own daughter, Margaret Salinger, who wrote a memoir called Dreamcatcher. And her book really busts some of the myths about him being this remote, holy mystic.
Oh, absolutely. This is my favorite part of the real Salinger because it humanizes him in such a strange and contradictory way. Margaret reveals that while her father was writing these stories about spiritual detachment and enlightenment, he was also sitting around the house watching B-movies and eating popcorn.
Really? What was he watching?
He loved W.C. Fields. He loved the Marx Brothers. He apparently saw the genre noir film Grand Illusion at least 10 times. But Margaret points out something really insightful. She says he had a 1940s movie worldview. He would stereotype real people based on old film tropes.
What do you mean?
He saw the world through the lens of the very Hollywood cinema he claimed to despise. If you acted like a character from a movie he liked, you were good. If you didn't fit one of his tropes, you were a phony.
So you have this massive contradiction at the heart of the man. You have the saintly wisdom of Seymour Glass in his books, and then you have the controlling, movie-obsessed, deeply difficult man in the living room.
Precisely. He loved the idea of innocence, the idea of spiritual love, but he seemed completely incapable of handling the messy reality of actual human relationships. He loved humanity in the abstract, but couldn't stand it up close.
And that controlling nature, it extended beyond his family into his legal affairs. He becomes what people call the litigious recluse.
He did seem to love a good lawsuit. He was constantly threatening people, constantly suing. He treated the court system like his own personal security detail.
The most famous case was against the biographer Ian Hamilton.
Right. He sued to stop Ian Hamilton from publishing a biography because it quoted from his personal letters. And here's where you get this beautiful, ironic twist, the Streisand effect, before we even had a name for it.
How so?
Because he sued to protect his privacy, the court transcripts from the case were released to the public. And those transcripts contain more personal details and direct quotes from his letters than the biography ever would have.
Yeah.
He inadvertently doxed himself because he was so pathologically obsessed with control. He won the legal battle, but he absolutely lost the war for privacy on that one.
And he also went after fiction writers, which seems like a step further.
A huge step. He sued to stop the publication of a book called 60 Years Later. Coming Through the Rye, which was an unauthorized sequel where a 76-year-old Holden Caulfield escapes from a nursing home. He won that case too, effectively banning the book in the United States. He fought to the very, very end. He wanted to own Holden Caulfield's soul.
He died in 2010, natural causes, at age 91. He lived a very long life. But even in death, there's this one final massive twist: the vault.
The vault. This is the holy grail of modern American literature. It is the thing that keeps Salinger scholars up at night.
Because, as we said right at the start, he didn't stop writing when he stopped publishing in 1965.
Not at all. He wrote almost every single day for 45 years. He had a concrete bunker, a studio on his property. He would go there every morning, bring his lunch, and just write. His daughter described seeing a filing system he had in his safe, and it had a specific color code.
What was the code?
A red mark on a manuscript meant, if I die, publish this as is. A blue mark meant, publish but edit this first.
That is incredibly organized and forward-thinking for a supposed recluse.
He was preparing. He knew he was writing for posterity. He was writing for the future.
And do we have any real idea what's actually in there?
Only rumors. A neighbor claims Salinger once told him he had as many as 15 unpublished novels locked away. We can safely assume there are more stories about the Glass family, maybe something directly about his time in the war, a proper war novel we've never seen. But what we do know is that his son, Matt Salinger, and his widow, Colleen, have been working for over a decade now to transcribe and prepare all this material.
And they have confirmed that it will be released, right? This isn't just a myth.
Matt Salinger has been very clear on this point. He calls it a major undertaking because his father's handwriting was difficult, and there are tons of notes to sort through. But the promise is, and I'm quoting here, all of what he wrote will at some point be shared. So we're going to get it.
So after all this, what does it all mean? We've spent this time taking apart the myth, and we found a traumatized soldier, a controlling and often cruel partner, a hypocritical mystic, and a relentless, disciplined writer.
I think we're left with a man who was just defined by his contradictions. He was a master communicator who chose to stop speaking to the world. He was a great lover of innocence who, you could argue, damaged the innocence of the young women in his own life. And he was a writer who, for half a century, wrote only for an audience of one, himself.
Salinger once said in that rare interview that publication was a damned interruption. Well, the interruption is over now. The public scrutiny he fought so hard against has no one left to fight.
Which really raises the final provocative question, doesn't it? When that vault finally opens, and we know it will, what are we going to find? Will we find the work of a genius who kept evolving and deepening his craft in total silence? Or will we find that the silence itself was the only thing keeping the mystique alive? Was the greatness all just a projection of our own curiosity?
While we wait to find out, I think I'm going to go reread 9 stories. It feels different now, knowing all of this.
It certainly does.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.